us in here, so that is a great start. Fantastic. Very warm welcome. Has to be a warm welcome because it is very cold around the Republic. I'm sure you guys are finding it as well. How's everybody doing? You should be able to chat in the chat. I looked and it said that it was open. Yes, it is. Hi, Michaela. And then we'll get started. How's everybody doing today? Again, really good. Cold. Hi, Anthony and Sharon and Notagorzo. So let's see, and Logan. Welcome to all of you. Hi, Avi. I'm well, thank you. Hope you are too. Hi, Eda Kanyani, Isel, welcome to you, and Bafana. How are you guys surviving this cold front coming through? Gabriella asking if it's possible to increase my volume. How is everybody else finding my volume right now? I'm going to have a look at that in the meantime. Just let's see if it is a me problem. How are you guys hearing me? It seems like the volume is okay for a lot of you. Thank you. It might be a problem on your side, possibly. Yeah, sometimes that can happen. Good. Yes, I see some names of people who have been in these webinars before, but I also see a lot of new names, which is fantastic. Wendy, Zwelicia, where are you? Zwelicia, where are you? Where is it, Wendy? Hi, Lorato, welcome to you. Hi, Nongolelo, thank you for joining us. I'm not in the office next door to you. As you can see, I am in my rooms across town. Hi, Deepti. Welcome to you. Hi, Karishma. Eswatini. Okay, fantastic. So windy in Eswatini. Yeah. Hi, Celine. Cape Town is freezing, Michaela, with light rain. That sounds very much like a late autumn, wintry Cape Town day there for you. Hi, Caesar. Welcome to you as well. Okay. We're going to be chatting mental health first aid in just a moment. Who here is joining for the first time? If you could just raise a hand, that will help me just to know how much of an introduction I should give about myself, how much details I should get into. How many of you are joining these webinars for the first time? Just to raise a hand if you do. Hi, Montegozo. Welcome from South Korea. Amazing. Hot and humid. Okay, so you're having a very different experience to probably most of us who are in and around Southern Africa. Gabriella from Mpumalanga, also quite sunny there. So, okay. Hi, Otto Kling. Welcome to you. Welcome to you with this first webinar. Thank you. The Apple enjoying the rainy weather. Okay, that's great. Celine, yeah, also for the first time. See a number of hands went up. Good. Okay. Well, welcome to all of those of you who are joining for the first time. I see there are a number of you, and that is fantastic. I hope that you will be able to continue to join us as we go through the year. We are in May, which means we've had 4 of these already. This is our 5th one. And we will continue to hold them on a monthly basis throughout the year. The idea is to cover a whole lot of really important psychological topics that can help us be well-rounded and not just kind of reliant on the hard technical skills that make us successful in our careers, but also the softer skills, as we term them, which can help us navigate relationships, difficulty, and understand ourselves And these are skills that are also helpful outside of our professional and our academic lives, and allow us to really live lives that are meaningful and purposeful, and have relationships that are successful as well. So these are the types of things that we will be speaking about through this webinar series. We've covered a number of topics already. This one right here, as you can see on your screen, I'm sure it is sharing. I hope that it's coming up. Let me know if it's not, but you should be able to see the presentation. We are going to be talking a little bit about mental health first aid. So yeah, just by way of introduction, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is James Sturdee. I'm a therapist, a registered psychological counselor. I am in practice in Durban. I consult with Regent Business School and the counseling services as well. I've been doing that for 8 or 9 years now. I do a lot of the student counseling there and a lot of the staff counseling, and I do a lot of these types of workshops and trainings as well. And then I spend the rest of my time in my private practice just across town, up on the hill in Morningside, and I work a lot with couples, and I work a lot with individuals as well, dealing with issues such as grief, trauma, and anger management. I do a lot of emotional intelligence work and emotional regulation work. I also, basically, a lot of my work is just dealing with people who are going through difficulties in life. It doesn't have to be necessarily anything too clinical. We're not talking about severe psychopathology, but rather just people who are, reaching maybe challenges in their lives and want to figure some stuff out or understand themselves more. These are the types of things that I work with, and I've been doing this since 2010. So this is my 15th year in practice. I've been in private practice for about 8 or 9 years as well. So that's a bit about me. The aim of today's webinar is just to give you firstly a bit of an idea of what are we talking about when we're talking about mental health, and what are we talking about with regards to wellness and health as opposed to ill health. And then how do we support the people in our lives who might be struggling? This is a really thorny issue, and I think it's an issue that a lot of people have questions about and maybe find it quite hard to do, because caring for another person who is struggling with their mental health is a very difficult it's a very difficult position to be in, because ultimately there's not a huge amount we can do, and we can feel quite powerless often, because one of the realities of psychological well-being is that we can't be responsible for another person's happiness. And if we could be, well, that would be a lot easier. But ultimately, everybody's well-being is their own responsibility. And when someone is struggling with something, it's very hard for us to do anything that's actually going to take away their pain, take away their unhappiness. Or if there's nothing necessarily acute causing it, it's also very hard for us to make another person feel happy and feel experiences of positive emotion. And we can do so much, but ultimately it's often not a long-term solution. So when we start to recognize that powerlessness, that sense of helplessness that we can have when we see people close to us suffering, it can be helpful just to go back to basics and say, well, what can we actually do? What is in our power? How can we support the people that are close to us that might be going through difficult times with their mental health? And focusing on the areas that we can control, that can give us a little bit of a sense of, oh, this is something that might be helpful, this is something that might not be. I think often in these situations, we're afraid of doing the wrong thing, right, or saying the wrong thing as well, especially if people are going through really extreme hardship. So yeah, that's the idea today. We'll speak a bit about that. Feel free to put comments in and questions in the chat as we go. I'll try to keep an eye on it. I won't get everything, but I'll get some of it as it comes up. I'll be checking in from time to time. And there'll be a little bit of space at the end of the session as well for Q&A. So if you have any questions as well that you want to leave to the end, you can do that, but also you're welcome to put them in as we go. Yeah, so we have an hour blocked for this. We should finish a little bit before the hour, and then again, there'll be some time just for a bit of discussion then as well. Okay, so firstly, if we're talking about mental health first aid, so this is kind of analogous to first aid in terms of paramedic support, life support. Often people will go on first aid courses, People who deal with children often have to go on first aid courses as well. Should an emergency happen, what do they do? And you kind of learn the basics. I don't think I've actually ever been in one, so I'd be speaking out of turn if I spoke about what the basics were. But I think often in these situations, it's about, CPR and I think the emergency rest position. Is that what people do in these courses as well, in terms of physical health and physical emergencies, um, and burns and cuts, and how do you deal with that type of thing? So we have an idea of what good physical health looks like, and we have an idea of what a physical health emergency might look like. But perhaps it's a little bit harder to pin down exactly what is good mental health and what would a mental health crisis look like. How do we pick up the signs? It seems like a good place to start. So psychology increasingly has been focused, and when I say psychology, I mean the discipline of psychology, the field of psychology, research and clinical practice has been focused increasingly on not just the alleviation of suffering. That was really how it started. So psychology was kind of born out of this observation that human beings can have psychological pain, and sometimes that psychological pain is not necessarily tied to anything that's going on right there in their lives, but they might be experiencing suffering, even if everything in their life seems kind of, stable. Psychology was born out of the observation that this can happen. This is an experience human beings happen. So how this is an experience that human beings can have. So how do we kind of help alleviate those symptoms? How do we take away the symptoms of things like depression, low mood, unhappiness, and hopelessness and worthlessness? How do we help with symptoms of anxiety, just restlessness and worrying and unease and overthinking? How do we kind of take away those symptoms? That's what psychology typically has focused on. But increasingly, it is about not just saying, well, how do we alleviate suffering, but also how do we promote well-being? It's not about absence of illness but it's also about saying, well, how do we understand what it means to live a life that is fulfilling and meaningful and purposeful and full of experiences that bring positive emotion? How are we able to experience positive emotion? How are we able to be present? And how are we able to live lives that we relish and we cherish, and we don't get to the end of them filled with regret and guilt? These are the things that psychology focuses on as well. And this is a hallmark of good mental health as well, as the ability to regulate our feelings, to not run away from the things that cause us pain or discomfort, the capacity to be present in the moment, and to realize that's where experientially all of our living happens, is right here in this moment that we have right now. And the ability to kind of point our attention or direct our attention towards this present moment is a fundamental hallmark of good mental health, as opposed to being stuck in the past or preoccupied with the future. So good mental health is about that. It's about meaningful relationships, healthy relationships, connections with other human beings as well. So yeah, this would include things like emotional well-being. That means regulated feelings. It doesn't mean an absence of negative feelings or difficult feelings. It doesn't mean we don't feel sad or angry or disappointed. We get to feel all of those feelings, but we can regulate them. We can experience them. We can be mindful about them, and we can release them, and we don't necessarily have to live there. Psychological resilience, this ability to kind of bounce back, or bounce back ability as it's often referred to. How do we kind of go through life when life is punching us in the face? Again, it doesn't mean that punches shouldn't hurt, but how are we able to stand on our feet? Or if we get knocked down, how are we able to get up again? And how are we able to, make choices about the direction that we go when things are hard? Social functioning as well, as I briefly mentioned, their relationships are such a important part of happiness, and all of the research, science of happiness points towards how people who, especially as our lives continue, we get into our later years, people who have really connected relationships and meaningful connections with people in their lives typically are a lot happier and a lot more well-being, have a lot more well-being in their lives. And the converse is true, is people who are feeling isolated and people who are feeling alone, disconnected, and that there aren't people that they can reach out to during difficult times, these people typically are more unhappy. So you could say relationships and connections are also a hallmark of good mental health. And it doesn't mean that you have to have the widest social circle, have 2,000 friends on Facebook. It just means that in times of hardship, do you feel alone? Are there people that you can call on? Are there people that you can share your life with, even if it's just a handful or less than a handful? And then purpose and fulfillment. Do we feel fulfilled in what we're doing? Are we living lives that feel like they're full and fulfilling? Do we feel like the things that we do, not everything all the time has to be purposeful and meaningful, but generally in our lives, do we feel like there's meaning to getting up in the morning and getting through the day and carrying the burdens that we have to carry? Does it feel like there's purpose to that? So these are the hallmarks of good mental health. See a few hands going up. If there's anything I should know, let me know. It might just be from the previous question I asked. But if you, again, feel free to put any thoughts in the chat if anything is relevant. I'm not seeing anything there right now. Okay, so firstly, when we are providing first aid in terms of mental health, the first thing is just to recognize what it might look like. And we'll go into a bit of detail as we go through this webinar. Just what do the symptoms of poor mental health look like? How do they present? Because they're not always necessarily straightforward. And people who are struggling don't often signpost it as well. As we'll explore, people often hide the way that they're feeling. And then knowing what is an appropriate response, right? How to listen without judgment, to provide reassurance and ensure that they are feeling safe and secure. How do we do that? And then also, how do we then say, well, my role here is limited. I can't be your therapist because I'm your friend or because I'm your partner, because I'm your brother. So how do I then link you to people who can help you, appropriate professionals who are able to provide support in this space? Okay, so this is the big question. How can I help? And people are not very good at answering this for themselves. And most people will not volunteer this information. So people who are going through difficult times often withdraw. They don't reach out for help. And this is specifically the case with something like depression. And depression is such a widespread mental health it's such a common presentation of mental ill health that you find depression in so many different clinical disorders. So many of them are comorbid with depression, schizophrenia and bipolar, even anxiety. They often go alongside depression itself. So it's a very common human experience. But typically what happens when people are starting to feel depressed is that, this lower mood makes them do less, and it makes them kind of bit more inhibited and paralyzed. And so we stop doing the things that are often quite good for us, which is connecting with people or reaching out, asking for help, or talking about the way that we're feeling, exercising, eating well and sleeping well. People who are depressed often, shut down and stop doing these things. So they stop asking for help, and they stop speaking to people, and they stop seeing people, and they stop getting out of bed, and they draw the curtains. And there's theories that say, well, depression is just your body's way and your mind's way of saying things can't go on the way that they have been going on. The thing that you've been carrying has been too heavy for too long. You need to find a way of putting it down or asking for help. But it often requires completely shutting down everything. So all of that to say, people who are struggling with something like depression, for example, or going through a very difficult time, are much more likely to withdraw than to actually ask you for help. And so the question of how can I help is actually quite a good one to ask if you're looking to support people. You don't have to assume that you know, or that even they know, but having a discussion around that to say, I can see that this is a hard time for you. What can I do? What would be helpful to you? And that might be giving you space even. Okay, so masking is a very common strategy for hiding emotional pain. This is a very common feature of a lot of mental ill health, that we wear a mask and we pretend to be okay. And so many people in your life, they're probably come across as, happy and strong and confident. They are masking how much pain they're actually carrying. And occasionally you might get a glimpse of it. But so many people will come into an office such as the one I'm in right now, and they'll speak about how much they're suffering and how hard things are. And they'll say, but no one in my life really knows it because I'm so good at hiding it from everybody else. And this is such a common human experience as well, this masking. But it's exhausting. People find it absolutely draining emotionally to put on that mask. And it's hard enough to feel, difficulty when we're going through a difficult time, to feel all of the pain of it. It makes it even harder when we feel we have to hide that from everybody around us. So this is what is in the literature described as strategies of disconnection. So people are absolutely craving connection with other people. People want to be seen, and they want to be appreciated, and they want to be recognized, and they want to be heard. But they're also terrified of it. They're terrified of the vulnerability it takes to actually be seen and to be heard, because it requires that the courage to say, well, this is who I really am, and this is what I'm really feeling. So there's this gap between what we want, which is connection with people, and true connection with people comes through trust and vulnerability, open-heartedness to say, this is where I am right now. There's a gap and a conflict between that and then the defenses that we put in place to make sure that people don't see us, because we're afraid of being seen and being judged, and we're afraid people will hear what we're thinking and think that it's ridiculous or shameful, or they'll tell other people about it. So these two things often are in conflict: this craving for connection and this fear of connection. And people will often then put up these really elaborate defenses around themselves, such as masking, such as pretending that everything's fine, denying their feelings, avoiding it, intellectualizing, cognitively processing their feelings, as opposed to actually just saying how they're really feeling. And people, all of us, I think, probably have been guilty of this at some time. We confuse being seen as weak we confuse vulnerability with weakness. If I'm vulnerable, it feels like I'm being weak, and if I'm being strong, it means that I'm being stoic, and I never have to admit that right now I'm really battling. And because of that, we hide how we're feeling, because no one wants to feel that they're weak. We want to feel that we're strong and capable. Sometimes definitionally we get it wrong, that by seeing these things as weakness, by seeing vulnerability and honesty as weakness, it then eliminates the possibility that we can be vulnerable. It takes it off the table, and so we have to wear these. We have to put these walls around ourselves. It's helpful to think about two types of mental health crises. So there's acute and chronic. So acute just means right now there's something going on. It's a short-term thing, and it's probably going to pass, and it's probably quite situational, probably quite environmental. Something has probably happened, such as the death of a loved one, a recent traumatic event, significant adjustment or loss. These are the kind of acute mental health crises. They're kind of quite easy to spot. We normally know when people are going through them, because people are more likely to say, my father died yesterday, or I lost my job last week. I was hijacked a day ago. These are the kind of acute mental health crises. And the chronic ones are the longer term ones, which is less of a kind of current crisis, more of a long term ongoing crisis, which is there's something wrong with my mental health. Maybe wrong is not quite the right word, but there's some that I'm suffering in a way in terms of my mental health that's not necessarily situational. It's not that something has happened that makes me feel so sad and angry, hurt, but rather that's just kind of feelings that I'm struggling with on a longer term, ongoing basis. And there are different ways of responding to both of these, right? So we wouldn't respond necessarily to an acute crisis as the way we would support someone who's going through longer term crisis, because they have different causes, right? And you could understand, as much as the chronic mental health conditions are very much a part of human experience as well. So anxieties, we're going to talk about this next month, actually, in our webinar. Anxiety and depression, we're going to speak a bit about that. But generally speaking, anxiety is a very common human condition. And we'll go into reasons. I won't go into it now, why it's so common. Depression is very common as well. But they're not necessarily every day. And some people will go through their lives not suffering from severe anxiety or severe depression. Most people at some point are going to experience variations of that, forms of that. But normally it's going to be more situational. So situational, something's happened, and so I feel this way. So you would respond to that in a different way, and you would support someone in a different way than someone who is suffering with their mental health over a longer term. Okay, so starting first with the acute mental health, and how do we support people like that? So I'm just going to take you through 4 different thoughts on how to do that. Then we'll move over to the chronic ones. It's just recognizing the signs first of, and most of the time, again, this is going to be communicated to you, or you will be aware of it, because normally people are less, this varies depending on what it is, but normally people are less secretive and feel less ashamed of mental health difficulties when there's something kind of obvious that's going on in their life, and they probably are able to recognize, okay, this is quite a normal human reaction I'm having here. And actually, a big part of treating trauma is normalizing it and helping people understand the way you're feeling right now, as abnormal as it feels and as overwhelming and frightening and destabilizing, fearful and threatening as it feels right now in your situation. It's a very normal human condition, and so people are, that's a very important way of treating it. People are a bit more likely to be open about what they are going through over the short term. So you'll see these types of symptoms. So these are the kind of, the obvious ones that you might see. So, very emotional responses: crying, numbness, shock, confusion, disorientation, panic symptoms, panic attacks, or dissociation. And dissociation is a protective psychological mechanism. When something feels too much for us, we shut down. Children who go through severe abuse or maltreatment, they often learn to dissociate, and that's something that carries on throughout their lives. But anyone can do it as well. When we just feel like the thing that we are going through is too much for us to handle, it's unbearable, it's intolerable, there's too much horror involved with it, then we kind of dissociate from it, which is we distance ourselves. We're not fully present or conscious with it, and it can be this separation between what we're going through and how we're actually feeling. So those are the constrictive symptoms as well of acute emotional distress. Things like trauma as well present like this as well. And again, these are quite easy to identify. Normally, you'll know why people are going through those types of things as well. So once you recognize it, there's a huge amount of value in responding with a grounded presence. So grounded presence just means you're there, you're not going anywhere, you're present in that moment. And there are a number of reasons why this is so helpful. So the neurological, the biological explanation for that, and this is explained through polyvagal therapy, which you might have heard about. It's quite common these days in treating trauma. It's basically it's an understanding of how the vagus nerve, which is one of the main nerves that goes from the nervous system into your body. It's part of the stress response, the fight or flight response. It's about understanding how we get into different states, different arousal states, different kind of docile states. And what this theory advocates for is how, when our nervous systems are feeling very dysregulated, and a dysregulated nervous system is a response to what our minds perceive as some type of threat outside. So if we go through some type of trauma, extreme stress, our nervous systems respond in the fight or flight response to deal with what's happening around there. So it's a survival mechanism. And this dysregulated emotional and physiological and biological system then responds very well to someone who's very regulated, a grounded presence. So this just means being able to kind of be calm in the presence of someone who is really feeling very big feelings. We don't have to respond to big feelings with big feelings. We can just be there, and the jargon these days is to say things like to hold space for it, and that might mean something to you, it might not. But the idea is you're just there being available, and you're not kind of pushing your feelings back on the person who's really struggling. Someone who's going through a very emotionally aroused situation, and maybe they're crying or they're hyperventilating, just being there, sitting there with them, and reminding them you're not going anywhere, you're grounded with them, you're available for them. That's also a way of helping their nervous system then regulate itself through the connection with you in that moment. So you can stay physically present and emotionally available. This you can do just through your behavior. So just by being there, you can also reassure with your words. I'm here with you. You're not alone. I'm not going anywhere. I'll stay as long as I need. And then allow space for silence or expression. So you don't have to fill the silences. That takes a huge amount of pressure off people as well, to know that they can just be with you in that moment. Talking might not be something they're ready for. And yeah, this is also a counseling skill. A lot of these things are skills that are used in counseling as well, and just to be able to recognize that you don't have to fill every single second with language. You can just allow space for thinking and processing and being there, and that's regulating in its own way. Okay, so responding with the grounded presence, that's the second one. And then providing immediate emotional support. So you don't have to fix the pain. We put so much pressure on ourselves as so much of the time, I think, to kind of take away the pain that the loved ones in our lives are feeling. Once we change the framing to say that's not our job, no one can take away the pain. They can't take away their pain. The most appropriate thing for a person who's going through a painful situation is to feel the pain. So take that pressure off yourself. You don't have to be the one who takes that pain away. Number one, because it's impossible. And two, because that's not your role in the situation. So you don't have to minimize it either. That's another thing that often people respond very badly to. So if I'm feeling something very overwhelming and then someone comes up to me and says, well, it could be worse, or at least it was only your dog who died. That's really invalidating of the feelings that I'm feeling in that moment, and probably going to make me think, okay, this person doesn't get it at all. I'm not going to speak to them, because it's actually quite painful in this moment to be misunderstood as well. So you don't have to, you can stay away from these phrases that minimize it, and just acknowledge it for what it is, as it is. And that in itself is normally enough. And what you're feeling makes complete sense after what happened. It seems like you're feeling exactly what I would be feeling as well. I think anyone would feel the way that you're feeling in the situation. It doesn't have to be bigger or smaller than it is. It's just what it is, what it is. And then you can offer small actions. So just the little things of just, signaling your support. Can I get you some water or a blanket? Can I take you somewhere quiet? What would be helpful? Have you eaten? Without forcing yourself on the other person, and making them feel that they have to manage you. This is something I think a lot of people who are struggling with acute psychological pain often worry about having to manage the reactions of other people. So they're saying, it's so hard to carry what I'm carrying right now. If I now open up and I talk to you about it, now I have to worry about your feelings about it as well. Make sure that you're okay. So taking that out of the equation and saying that, right now, this is not about me. It's not about my feelings. I can imagine and I can get a sense. I can empathize with the way that you're feeling. I can offer a compassionate presence. But it's not about actually my feelings in this moment right here. And then finally, just continuing to encourage stabilization and then support. So deep breathing is a really good way of regulating an active nervous system. So it's the best way that we have for calming down our stress response. Deep breathing, you can't slow your heart rate down absent of just lying down, and even then it might still be beating quite hard. There's no thought you can think right now that's going to say, okay, well, now I want to take my heart rate down to 40 beats per minute. The only way you can do that, the only way you can really stabilize and have any type of influence on your nervous system, the most direct way at least, is breathing. So through your breathing, that's sending all sorts of messages to your brain, and then that's sending all sorts of messages to the rest of your nervous system, and for example, your heart, your blood pressure, or perspiration, to say, okay, we are in we're in a resting state right now. We're not in a fight state right now. And that's really helpful. So just being able to breathe with someone, especially if they're experiencing something like an anxiety attack. Because people who are going through an anxiety attack feel completely overtaken by their bodies. So their minds are kind of, pushed to the side, and it's just this bodily, physical reaction. It's very overwhelming. Just being able to take it back to the breath as well can be really helpful. There are indirect ways that we can affect our nervous system, our stress response. Thoughts that you think are going to kind of upregulate or downregulate the response that you're having. If you think something bad's going to happen, and then you kind of feed that with thoughts, that can make you then feel more emotions, more adrenalized, and you can have that. But it's a kind of indirect process. Breathing is the most direct intervention that we have for an active nervous system. And then just ask. Always, don't be afraid to ask how you could be helpful. And this is another way to say, well, can I call someone? Can I reach out to someone? Do you have someone who would like you would like to know where you are right now, or someone that can help you with this. And then we'll talk about this just as we go, but also being able to refer to either emergency support or more long-term linking with professional support, especially if it's very severe trauma. Okay, so that's the acute response. Basically, the situational response is trauma, loss, when a person's feeling very overwhelmed in the moment, or over a period of a few days because of something that's happened. The chronic mental health first aid looks a little bit different. So you might see symptoms such as persistent sadness or low mood. And again, people are going to hide these things, but you can catch it from time to time. Low mood you can catch as well. It's linked often to low energy and sense of a bit of hopelessness and less enjoyment. These are types of things you can notice in people who are close to you. More irritability. Anger is a much more common presentation of pain than sadnesses. So you're going to see people's anger. That'll be a very it'll be a very clear sign that something in their life is causing them pain. A person who's very angry is a person who's hurting a lot. And the mood swings, the ups and the downs, also very, very much easier to notice if you're around someone over a period of time. The feelings of hopelessness or helplessness, feeling like they're not in control of their lives, feeling like the future is not doesn't offer any prospects for them. Those are the emotional symptoms. The cognitive symptoms, the cognitivity of thought. People might find it difficult concentrating. You might see that they're not able to sustain attention for a long time. They might find it hard to make decisions. If that executive functioning gets lost, they'll come across as very indecisive a lot of the time. Racing thoughts, so rumination, overthinking, constantly restless and worrying about all the things that might happen. These are very common signs of anxiety as well. A low self-esteem, excuse me. Low self-esteem is a very common part of any type of long-term mental health challenges, and that will be often presented such as a very negative self-talk, critical self-talk, self-judgment, self-rejection, a lack of kindness and compassion. Those are the cognitive symptoms. The behavioral symptoms, so what does it actually look like? What are people doing? You'll see probably less of people who are close to you. You'll notice that they do less, that socialize less. There might be different reasons for this, but this is one of the clues that someone might be struggling with mental health over a longer period. You might notice that they're sleeping more, or they're not sleeping. Maybe they're eating more, they're eating badly, or maybe they're not eating, putting on weight or losing weight. Just changes in these patterns is noticeable. Personal hygiene might start to decline. Maybe they stop meeting their responsibilities, or they stop showing up when they said they were going to show up. And then finally, the physical symptoms. So how does it actually present in the body? They might be more tired or aching or fatigued, less energy. You might notice that they're having panic attacks. They might constantly be restless or on edge. These are the common behavioral, physical, emotional, cognitive symptoms of poor mental health. And you'll start to get clues that someone close to you is suffering in terms of their mental health. And the mental health is in a great place when you start to see a number of these together. Yeah. So to also your question about people who are highly functional but depressed, how does that work? So a lot of people who are depressed are highly functional. But that's often a phase as well. So you can be depressed and highly functional, but typically that would then start to over time become more low functioning. It's hard to stay high functioning with depression over a longer period, chronic depression. But because there's a number of reasons how it might happen. I mean, people might just have been depressed from early on in their lives. They've learned how to mask it, and they've learned how to kind of hack themselves to show up in a way. They might have substances that help them do that as well. Yeah, there's many ways that people can mask those symptoms and not let them be debilitating. But typically over time, you're going to find that depression is going to affect with functioning. And definitionally, it kind of has to as well, because in order to be diagnosed with depression or any mental health disorder, as per the DSM, it does need to affect with some level of functioning in your life. So if you are depressed but still functioning and it's not affecting your occupation or your relationships or your academic life, then you wouldn't actually meet a depression diagnosis. So it has to affect some type of functioning. Typically over time it will. You might find that there's a window period where depression is there or it's masked, and then eventually it starts to debilitate. And this is often what it looks like burnout as well. People who work really hard, and maybe work becomes a way of actually dealing with depression. Because depression, I'm feeling low, I'm feeling bad about myself, I'm feeling hopeless, I'm feeling unorganized, I'm feeling like, no one really finds me very valuable. And then work can be a way where I get structure and validation and immediate kind of feedback and promotions and, all sorts of social rewards. People are pleased with all of the work that I'm putting in. But then over time, that starts to actually, I throw so much of myself into work, it stops working over time. And if I start to have any issues in my work, then everything can come crashing down quite quickly. And that's often what burnout looks like. I hope that answered your question, Togozo. Okay, so yeah, we just have a couple of minutes left. I'll take you through these last few slides. Any other questions, you can put them in the chat, start thinking about them as well if necessary. So yeah, approaching with compassion and respect. So we don't have to force ourselves on someone. We don't have to kind of coerce someone into receiving emotional support from us. It's important to remember it's not about us. It's not about our feelings of, I wish that I can help, or I'd feel better about myself if I helped. It's about having the respect for the other person's autonomy and their boundaries, and approaching that carefully and intentionally. So yeah, you don't have to bring it up in public. This is a obvious thing to say, but be mindful about, if you are going to have a conversation, be mindful about the conditions, the framing of that conversation. Where are you going to have it? When are you going to have it? That conversation would probably be best without an audience. Be aware of language and how, without realizing it, we can introduce judgment into our language, putting judgments on certain things. I think it's bad that you're suffering like this, or I can see that I can see that you're that life is too big for you right now. Just to be aware of your language and describe things as they are without necessarily having to label them. Concern. So I've noticed this about you. I've noticed that you don't seem yourself, or you seem a little bit different. Yeah. I'm seeing the questions. Yeah, we'll pause. I'll answer some of them before I move on. So derealization whilst having anxiety, Kylie, it's a great question. It would depend. I don't want to kind of give a boilerplate answer for that, because it really would depend. So derealization, for those of you who are wondering, it's when you feel like things aren't actually real. So it's almost this disconnection. Is this really happening to me? Or did this thing really, or am I really in this situation right now? It's kind of it's almost a dissociative experience. Often with anxiety and any type of extreme dissociation or physiological response, stress response, it's helpful just to ground ourselves. And you can ground yourself through your senses. So, in what you see and touch, smell, and taste, for example. So now your question about managing stress when you're under pressure, well, that's a big question, and it deserves a workshop of its own. And we will speak more about stress, because essentially that's when you are going to feel stress. One of the times you're going to feel stress almost certainly is when you're under pressure, and that's okay. It's not that we need to not feel stressed when we're under pressure, but we need to feel the right amount of stress. And we need to be able to channel that stress into performance, right? As opposed to letting it debilitate us. So yeah, the skill of managing your stress when under pressure is a very helpful life skill, but there's a lot to it, and it's probably best unpacked in a bit more detail in another webinar, because there is a lot there. Yeah, thanks, Doc. Was a great feedback there as well. Very interesting. Okay, so listening without judgment as well. We spoke a bit about judgment. That just means putting a label, putting a value on what people are saying. Often, it doesn't have to be the explicit judgment, which is, I think, the way you're feeling is stupid. It can be the little implicit judgments that are there. Yeah, so practice active listening when we are listening. So it just means you're kind of sending the signals back that you're present and you're hearing, that you are understanding. Don't interrupt. And if you do interrupt with an explanatory question, that's okay. What do you mean by that? Or tell me more about that. there are times where interrupting is actually not just a way of hijacking, but directing and allowing them to talk more, and also signaling, I'm listening and I'm curious. Yeah, don't rush to solutions. This is the same as trying to minimize or take away pain. Most people don't want advice from you. If people want advice from you, they'll normally ask for it. And even if they ask for it, they often don't want advice from you, in my experience. Most people just want to be heard. Maybe I should have started with that. I think that's probably the thing to kind of keep in mind through all of these interactions with someone who might be struggling, is they probably, high 90% probability, don't actually want you to tell them what to do. They might think they want that. They don't actually want that. They just want to be seen and they want to be heard. And most people are quite capable of figuring out their own problems when they have a space to do so. And just by speaking to you, they might not figure it out. You might have no idea what they should do, but it might start a process. It might also allow them to say, okay, well, this whole thing about opening up, that was quite helpful. Maybe now I'm ready to see a professional where I can figure some of this stuff out. So yeah, validate feelings. That just means, yeah, that this feeling that you're feeling sounds real. Yeah, wow, that does sound really hard. I can't imagine. That sounds really painful. That's really helpful. You're just validating that. These are kind of quite basic counseling skills, which are very helpful as well. Of course, your question about any advice for someone who is depressed but having difficulties opening up. So this comes down to what I was saying early on in the webinars, that's really normal, and you're probably describing almost most people who are depressed. Someone who is depressed is almost by definition going to be having difficulties opening up. So it comes down to everything that I'm saying is just the supportive presence that you can provide increases the opportunity that they have to open up to you. But ultimately, they're going to make that choice themselves. You can't pry them open. You can't get an emotional crowbar and kind of get those feelings out of them. You just have to say, you have to communicate, you have to signal, I am here and I'm trustworthy of your feelings right now. You can trust me, not just trust me not to tell anyone, but you can trust that I will respond in a way that's just going to be non-judgmental, present. And I'm not going to rush to tell you what to do or to tell you that your problems aren't real. And I'm not going to let my feelings get in the way. So that's really, all of this is what we're speaking about. It's just about what can you do as opposed to how do you get someone to open up. You can't do that. Yeah, good question. So Veronica, I'm just going to read your comment. I have a sister who has symptoms of chronic. I took her in thinking she would open up, but instead she just gets irritated and lashed out on the kids all the time. How do I help her then? Because I feel like she's verbally abusing the kids. Now, that's a tough one. If there are minors involved as well, you want to, obviously direct your response proportionately. You want to, take it more seriously, because if there are people who don't have power, you want to make sure that they are protected. But it depends what the level of verbal abuse is like. That can be subjective, I guess. And sometimes the interventions there might do more damage than the parent who's going through difficult times. It's a difficult situation. How do you help her? I think, again, all of these things is you just can try show that you are able to be there, but you can't do it for them. You can't force someone to recognize that they need help, and you can't force someone to take responsibility for their well-being. So yeah, a big part of it is acknowledging where our power ends. And then, yeah, I mean, if you're in that type of situation, also just being able to maybe see a professional yourself and get some, help you through your feelings there, but also maybe get some directions on what would be helpful there. Because it is objectively a difficult situation. So Charmaine, my situation is grieving. It happened December 24, not very long ago, 5 months. And the process of grief, that's not a long time at all, Charmaine. So you're in the process of doing a high certificate in accounting through my company. Before it happened, I'm not sure if I was supposed to counsel or wait to be mentally okay. There's no right or wrong answer to that. Some people are able to kind of channel the grief or compartmentalize it or park it and still perform cognitively and academically, and some people aren't. It just depends. Grief is such a personal thing, and it says nothing about the strength of a person if you're able to do that or not. It says about where you were when the grief occurred and where you were in terms of your own psychology and your own life. and who the person was. So it's a personal question. There's not a right or wrong way of doing that. If you're coping and you're able to still, carry on, that's ideal. If you're not, that's also very understandable. Grief can feel very debilitating. Okay, thanks for the questions. Keep them coming. Okay, then finally, I think this is finally encouraging professional support. So this comes down to the point of saying it's so important that people in their lives have people in their lives that they can speak to and that they can reach out. And that professionals are great, if I might say so myself, but ultimately people also want to have meaningful connections with the actual people in their lives that they're not paying to listen to them. That's important. So you don't want to necessarily outsource it all to professional and say, okay, you need to kind of speak to someone, I can't handle this. But knowing that both are important. So, for example, if I'm going through a difficult time, I want to be able to speak to the people in my lives about it. And I can I can filter that appropriately. And I can say, well, I'm going to tell this person, my brother, for example, certain things. I'm not going to be completely honest about everything I'm feeling. Doesn't mean I'm going to lie about it, but I'm not going to kind of share, maybe every little thing, maybe about my marriage, for example. Maybe he doesn't need to know all of that, but I can just say, I'm going through a difficult time, and that support would be really helpful for me. But then I can also go to my own therapist and I can speak about the problems that I'm going through in a much more unfiltered way, and that's helpful as well. So all of that to say, it's important to have both. So we would want to be there, I think, for the people in our lives to turn it around. We'd want them to be able to turn to us and trust us. But also we'd want to be able to say, when we are not able to help them with something and when it might be helpful to actually speak to someone in a professional setting. And you can do this again non-judgmentally. And if you are someone who has seen someone professionally as well, that can be really helpful to speak about your own personal experience and also to normalize it. And I think it is something that increasingly is becoming more normalized as we recognize that to be human is to feel psychological pain, and sometimes we need some help with that. And I think more and more people are aware of that, probably more so than they've ever been in the course of human history. So you can offer help, you can Google it, you can look up people online, you can find people in their area, you can give them some numbers and say, maybe reach out to them. You can say, well, maybe I can book the appointment if you'd like. I'm not going to do it for you if you don't want, but if it would be helpful for you, I'm happy to do it. So you can offer help in that regard. And then crisis hotlines. This is something that often, people feel very afraid of if someone's in a suicidal space, which is very common. It's a common human experience as well to have suicidal thoughts, often just a problem-solving technique. Most people who have suicidal thoughts never get anywhere close to actually taking action on it, but it is still something to be taken seriously, and something that scares a lot of people, the idea of their loved ones harming themselves. Knowing how to support in that situation is helpful as well. Resources, hotlines are necessary. Having connections with psychiatrists that they might be seeing, for example, and knowing that there are options such as inpatient admission. Lots of really good clinics these days that can be very helpful in just getting people through crisis situations there as well. And knowing that ultimately all of the things we've been speaking about, just being there and listening and respecting and being compassionate and holding space and being grounded, these are the things that people really need in those moments. Just know that there's someone there. Okay, this is finally. So a follow-up as well. If someone comes to you or you come to them and you have a conversation, it's a difficult one, don't be afraid to gently follow up again. And just, in a week's time, just say, how are you doing? You don't have to pretend it never happened. That just can introduce, a taboo around it or shame around it. So just check in regularly. You don't have to put pressure on them to maybe share again in the way they did, unless they want to. But just, check in to say, yeah, this happened. We had this conversation. Just making sure that you're okay. There's ongoing emotional support and patience. But then also respect their pace, right? You don't have to keep on saying, okay, well, let's talk about it right now. That's often something people fear, is when we, if I tell you about something, then you're going to keep on asking me, and you can talk about that as well. That's helpful to say, do you want me to bring this up again? Would it be helpful? Would you prefer that maybe we don't ever talk about this again? What would be best for you? That's just showing respect for another person's process. Okay, good. So we have about 5 minutes. I know there were some questions and comments that I have addressed as we went through. Don't know if I missed any. If I did, please repost or draw my attention. to them. And yeah, any questions now, please feel free to share them. Give you a minute or two to put them in if you're doing that. Thanks, Alicia. I appreciate that. Atlanta, is it normal behavior when one is unable to shed tears when faced with challenges? For example, they just move on as in suppressing how they feel. Um, Depends what you mean by normal. I think, yes, a lot of people probably do that. We learn how to deal with feelings often quite early on in our lives, and sometimes we learn how to be avoidant and how to not really actually connect with them. And then we don't feel the behavioral type of expressions, or we don't present the same types of behavioral expressions, such as crying, actual tears. So yes, it's very normal to do that in terms of suppressing how they feel. I think most people are quite good at avoiding their difficult feelings and suppressing it. And this is something we can do, but often it's just all we're doing is we are turning our conscious attention away from the feelings, but we still kind of carry the heaviness of them, even though we're not paying attention to it. Hope that answers your question. Long story short, yes, I think it is normal for people who are going through difficult times to suppress how they feel, not necessarily cry. Thank you for your comments. Thank you, Claudette, Eugendrin, thank you for that as well. And Eugenia, I'm glad it was needed. I'm glad the timing was good. Thank you, Debbie. I'm glad you understand. Yes, we are dealing with a lot, Mutsama. I think that is true. And I think acknowledging that life is hard. There's a lot on our plates. Show ourselves kindness and understand that these are normal human experiences that we're going through. I think that's a helpful framing as well. Guys, let's leave it there. I thank you for your participation and your attendance, and this was fun. I enjoyed it, and we will be at it again in a couple of weeks' time. We'll be speaking just a little bit about depression and anxiety more specifically, and how to understand those and what to do. Yeah, so look forward to that. If anyone would find it helpful to see me one-on-one, you're welcome to email me on counseling@regent, counseling with a double L, COUNSELLING @regent.ac.za. You're welcome to reach out as well. So thank you. I'm glad it was helpful as well. And thank you, everybody else. Have a good rest of your day, and stay warm.